7th grade, lesson 2.7, we're going to be looking at fractions and decimals. Now our goal for today is I can convert a fraction into a decimal and a decimal into a fraction. So we are going to be going back and forth. Again, let's go over our vocabulary. We have 3 terms this time. Place value. Place value describes the location and worth of the last number in a decimal. And really, it doesn't have to be a decimal. It can be any number, but typically we think of place value dealing with decimals. And so if you recall, the first place value immediately following the decimal is tenths, then hundredths, then thousandths. They all have the THS. And so those are place values, and we're going to use those whenever we're converting from a fraction to a decimal, or I'm sorry, from a decimal to a fraction. Terminating decimal. A terminating decimal is a decimal that ends, which means you're going to get a remainder of 0 eventually. So you're going to be dividing the numerator divided by the denominator, and if you get a remainder of 0 eventually, you may have to add some placeholding zeros, but eventually you're going to get a remainder of 0. Then it's terminating. It ends. It stops. Repeating decimals are decimals that never end, but they continue in a pattern, and that pattern repeats, thus the name repeating decimal. So if we want to go from a fraction to a decimal, to convert a fraction into a decimal, you just divide the numerator by the denominator. And we're going to do this using long division. I'm going to do some problems for you so you can see how this works. But all you have to do is take numerator divided by the denominator, because remember that fraction bar also means divided by. Let's look at some examples converting from a fraction to a decimal. All you have to do is divide. So let's take the fraction 3/8. Remember, this fraction bar means divided by. So this really means 3 divided by 8. So let's do it. 3 divided by 8. Top number goes inside. It's our dividend. The bottom number, the numerator, goes outside. It's the divisor. So 8 goes into 3 0 times. 0 times 8 is 0. Carry down the 3. My decimal point goes here. Because this was a whole number 3, that means the decimal is immediately after. Put a placeholding 0. Carry it down. 8 goes into 30. Well, I know 8 times 4 is 32, so it's going to go in 3 times. That's a little too big. 8 times 3, that's 24. Subtract. 30 minus 24, I know, is 6. Add a placeholder 0. Carry it down. 60. 8 goes into 60. 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56. Subtract. I'm running out of board. 4. Placeholder 0 and carry it down. So 40. 8 goes into 45 times. 5 times 8 is 40. So 3/8 as a decimal is 0.375, or 0 and 375. This is tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So 375 thousandths. Let's do 2 more so you can kind of see how this works. And I'm going to move my board so that I've got a little bit more length. So let's take 2/3. Now this means 2 divided by 3. So 2 goes inside the bracket, 3 on the outside. 3 goes into 2 0 times. Add a decimal point and add 1 above it. Placeholding 0. 3 goes into 20 6 times. 6 times 3 is 18. 20 minus 18 is 2. Add a 0. Carry it down. 3 goes into 20 6 times. 3 times 6 is 18. Subtract. 2. Add a 0. Bring it down. Now you should start to notice I'm getting the same number. I've had to figure out how many times 3 goes into 20 3 times now. That is a pattern. That's repeating. It's going to keep going on and on and on like this. So this is a repeating decimal. 2/3 as a decimal is 0 and 6/10 repeating, or 0.6 repeating. I use this bar to show that that 6 is repeating forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Now let's look at one with a improper fraction, or a mixed number. So 1 and 1/6. I can do this 2 different ways. I know that 1 and 1/6 is going to be equal to 1 point something, or 1 and something. So I could go ahead and put the 1 there and then just find out what 1/6 would be. I could also do what we have been doing. Every time we see a mixed number, we change it to an improper fraction. So 1 and 1/6, 6 times 1 is 6, plus 1 more, that's equivalent to 7/6. And if you think you might make a mistake, this is what you need to do. This is why I've been telling you over and over again, every time you see that mixed number, rewrite it as an improper fraction. So let's take 7 divided by 6. 6 goes into 7 one time. So you see that 1 is right back. We don't have to worry about it anymore. 1 times 6 is 6. 7 minus 6 is 1. There's my decimal point after the 7 because there's nothing after it. Carry my decimal point up. Add a place holding 0. 6 goes into 10 one time. Now this is not repeating though, because first time I was trying to figure out how many times 6 went into 7. This time it's how many times 6 goes into 10. So even though I get the same result up here in my quotient, it's not repeating because it's a different problem. 6 went into 7, now 6 is going into 10. Two different things. Now 1 times 6 is 6. 10 minus 6 is 4. Place holding 0, bring it down. 6 goes into 40. 6 goes into 40 6 times. 6 times 6 is 36. 40 minus 36 is 4. Place holding 0, bring it down. 40. Now I'm repeating because you can see twice I've had to figure out how many times does 6 go into 40. That tells me that this is repeating, just the 6. So 1 and 1/6 is going to be equivalent to 1 and 16/100ths with the 6 repeating, or 1.6 repeating. Again, the bar just goes over the part that's repeating. Okay, now we're going to look at terminating decimals into fractions, and now if we want to go from a decimal to a fraction, it's actually a whole lot easier than the process from a fraction to a decimal, but people get really confused by it. Don't get confused by it. It's easy. Don't make it hard. What you want to do is take all of the digits after the decimal point and put them in the numerator. Then you find the place value of that very, very last digit in your decimal. That number goes in the denominator, and then simplify if necessary. Now, if you have a mixed number, whatever the whole number was is going to remain the whole number in your decimal. So, for example, if you had 2 and 1/2, or 2 and 5/10, or 2.5, the 2 is going to stay as the whole number, and then it's 0.5, that's 5/10. So, it's going to be 5 over 10. And we're going to do some problems together. Okay, now we're going to look at terminating decimals into fractions, and we're only going to look at terminating decimals. I realize I did not specify this in the earlier part, and I really should have. The repeating decimals, we will go into in 8th grade, because in order to find it, you really need a scale that isn't taught until 8th grade. Generally, if it's a repeating decimal, it's going to go over 9. But we're not going to go into that. We're just going to convert terminating decimals into their fraction form. So let's take 0.125. If I were to say this correctly, this is tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So this is 125 thousandths. So I'm going to write it as 125 over 1,000. Now all I have to do is simplify. Now I know because it ends in 25, they can both be divided by 25. So 125 divided by 25 is 5. 1,000 divided by 25 is 40. That can be simplified even more by 5. So I'm going to divide both by 5. This is going to give me 1/8. And that's my answer. Now there is another way we can do it. It's kind of tricky and kind of weird. We're going to take just this whole number and put it over 1 because this is out of 1. And then this decimal point, I move it back 1, 2, 3 spaces to get to the end of the number. So I could do the same thing to my denominator. This is another way to get 125 over 1,000. But like I said, it's kind of weird. We're going to just stick with the place value. But I did want to show you that because that's a trick that you have to pull out of your hat sometimes. So let's look at 4/10. 0.4. Now, like I said, this is the tenths place. If I were to read it properly, it's 4/10 or 0 and 4/10. So that means it's 4 over 10. Now, 4 and 10 can both be divided by 2. So this is going to simplify to 2/5. So 4/10 is equivalent to 2/5. And really, this is a fraction and decimal conversion that you should be able to know off the top of your head because you're going to see it a lot. Let's do one more. Let's throw in a whole number. So 1 and 68 hundredths, or 1.68. Now, this is 68 hundredths. So that means the fraction part is 68 over 100. But we have to include this whole number. Since this is a 1 before the decimal point, it's going to be a 1 before the fraction. 1 and 68 100ths. Now, I can simplify this fraction because both numbers are even. So 68 divided by 100 gives me 34 over 50. Oh, and I can simplify further. Again, the 1 is just going to come for the ride. Divide by 2 again. I guess I could have divided by 4 at the beginning. So again, the 1 is just being carried out. It's started here and it went to here, then here, then here. We just have to continue to write it down. 34 divided by 2 is 17, and 50 divided by 2 is 25. So this is 1 and 17/25. Come tomorrow with your notes and ready to ask questions.